My name is Frank Johnson. All my life, I worked hard in Cleveland, Ohio, and this house wasn't just a roof over my head, it was the legacy I built for my family. After my heart surgery, I returned home expecting a little peace, some support, maybe just a bit of care from my daughter and her husband. What I got instead was a wall of cold indifference that cut deeper than any scalpel. All I wanted was a glass of water. My daughter, Emily, looked at me like I was a beggar on the street, not the man who dedicated his life to her happiness. "We're not your servants!" she snapped, her voice slicing through me harder than the pain in my chest from surgery. I looked at her, searching for the little girl who used to run barefoot through our yard with a fistful of wildflowers. But I saw nothing familiar in the woman standing before me. Her husband, Mark, sat slouched on the couch, glued to his phone. Without even glancing up, he mumbled, "You can get your own water, right?" I tried to get up, fighting against the stiffness and ache. Every movement burned, my chest throbbing from the surgery, my legs trembling like a newborn colt. "I just got out of the hospital," I tried to explain, my voice weak even to my own ears. Emily crossed her arms, her expression turning even harder. "We already do everything around here." "Sure, this is your house, but we're not your wait staff," she said, every word as sharp as a slap. I stumbled my way to the kitchen, feeling the house grow colder with every step. That simple glass of water, which once symbolized love in our family, now felt like a test I was meant to fail. By the time I got back to the living room, they both stared at me like I was some unwelcome stray. The laughter and warmth that once filled these rooms was gone, replaced with a silence so thick it choked. I looked around at these walls, built by my own hands, filled with memories, paid for with decades of sacrifice. I'd paid for Emily's college, her wedding, the down payment on their first car, every bailout and emergency. Now I couldn't even ask for a drink without being made to feel like a burden. It hit me, sitting there with my bitter-tasting water, I was no longer the master of this house. I was just a shadow, tolerated, not loved. Their indifference hurt more than the stitches in my chest. Back in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed, replaying the moment in my mind. I thought of my late wife, Linda, how we'd planned our whole future together, dreamed of grandkids filling the house with laughter. Now I lay in a quiet, empty room, wondering where it all went wrong. One thought wouldn't leave my mind: when did gratitude turn into cold entitlement? How had all my giving become something they expected, not something they appreciated? But there, in that silent room, I realized I had a choice. I wasn't just an old man, not yet. I pulled out the business card of my old friend, attorney James Carter. He'd helped me with the deed transfer to Emily 5 years back. At the time, I just wanted to protect her, as Linda would have wanted. Now, I needed to find out if the house was really lost to me, or if I still had the power to take back what was mine. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I called James. He wasn't surprised. He'd seen these things before. We set a meeting for Saturday at 10 a.m., when Emily and Mark would be out running errands. James arrived right on time, in his trademark gray suit and with the same worn leather briefcase I remembered. "Frank, let's see what we're dealing with here," he said, settling into my kitchen chair. I told him everything, no sugarcoating, no pride. "I gave Emily this house 5 years ago," I said. "I wanted her to feel secure, but now I just feel used. It's like I don't even matter in my own home." James flipped through my stack of papers, running his finger along the old legal lines. "Here's the important part," he said, tapping a section of the deed. "There's a clause here about reversion. Basically, if there's a major change, or if your daughter and her husband fail to provide you with reasonable care and respect, you can demand the property be transferred back." My heartbeat kicked up, faster than it should for a man in recovery. Maybe I hadn't lost everything after all. "How fast could we do this?" I asked. "If you can prove it, if you have evidence, statements from neighbors, records of what's happened, It's doable. They'd have 30 days to respond, James said. I decided I'd give them a chance to change. But deep down, I knew this house would be my fortress again, even if I had to fight for it. That Saturday afternoon, after James Carter's visit, I sat in my old leather chair by the living room window, watching the sunlight stretch across the front yard. The oak tree I'd planted with Linda decades ago was in full bloom, and I couldn't help but remember the days Emily used to climb its branches, her laughter echoing across the lawn. Those memories felt like a different life, a distant echo swallowed by the coldness that had settled in my home. Emily and Mark came back from shopping with their usual loudness, doors slamming, voices raised. I could tell by their cheerful banter that they had no clue about the storm quietly gathering beneath the surface. For a moment, I almost pitied them. But that feeling was fleeting. After dinner, I decided it was time to test the waters, to see if anything at all would change. Emily was in the kitchen, arranging groceries. Mark sat in front of the TV, feet up, absorbed in some mindless game show. I waited until Emily passed through the living room. "Emily," I said, as gently as I could manage, "would you mind grabbing me a glass of water?" She didn't even turn her head. "Dad, you're fine. You were up and about all day." "I'm busy right now," she replied, voice flat. Mark piped in from the couch, not taking his eyes off the screen. "You walked to the kitchen this morning? If you can do that, you can get your own water, Frank." I swallowed my pride and stood, letting the ache in my chest remind me of my limits. I moved slowly, deliberately, filling my own glass at the sink. I watched them, cataloging their every dismissive word and impatient sigh. They couldn't have made it clearer if they tried. I was a burden, an obligation, not family. After I'd finished my water, I sat quietly, listening as Emily and Mark started talking about redecorating their bedroom, shopping for a new lamp, making plans for a vacation with the money Mark expected to get from his tax return, all of it as if the house, the life, everything, belonged to them. I realized then that the warmth I'd tried to keep alive in this home was gone, replaced by something hollow and transactional. They were so comfortable in their sense of ownership, so certain they'd never be held accountable. But they'd made a mistake. They'd forgotten that old men, especially those who've built everything with their own hands, never forget the value of dignity. That evening, as they settled into their routine, I quietly gathered what little paperwork I still kept in my bedroom. I found receipts, documents, a few old letters from Linda about her hopes for Emily's future. I even jotted down my memories of the past few days, the things they'd said, the way they treated me. It was all evidence now, fuel for James Carter to light the fire I knew was coming. The next day, I called James, told him what happened, and he was calm but direct. "You did exactly what you needed to do, Frank. Keep writing down everything. Don't confront them yet. Let's do this by the book." I nodded, my resolve hardening. I would give them a final test, one last opportunity to show me they still had any sense of family left. If they failed, I'd go forward with everything James prepared, and this time, I'd be ready for the consequences. Monday morning, I sat at the dining table with the legal documents James had explained, my coffee growing cold beside me. When Emily finally wandered in, rubbing sleep from her eyes, I looked up. "Emily, can you sit down? We need to talk." She raised an eyebrow but sat, Mark joining her a moment later with his phone in hand. I didn't waste time. "I've been thinking a lot about this house, about family. You know, your mother, Linda, always said this place should be a haven for all of us. I want to believe that's still possible. But lately, well, I don't feel welcome here." Emily's face darkened. "Dad, are you starting this again? We're doing our best, but you're acting like we owe you something just because you're sick." I held her gaze. "I gave you this house, yes? But it wasn't meant as a free pass. It was meant as a gesture of love, with the hope you'd show me the same respect and care I gave you all your life." Mark scoffed. "You've got food, a roof, everything you need. What more do you want? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Just decency, Mark. Just kindness. And if you can't offer that, then maybe it's time you find another place to live. Emily's jaw dropped, but I stood, feeling stronger than I had in days. I'll give you time to think about it. But things can't go on like this, not anymore. As I left the room, I felt something shift inside me. The old Frank, the one who let family walk all over him for the sake of peace, was gone. In his place stood a man ready to reclaim his home and his self-respect. To be continued. Part 3 will follow after your request. ChatGPT. Part 3 of 9. That Monday night, I barely slept. My mind wouldn't stop replaying every moment of the past few days. The tone in Emily's voice, the way Mark looked at me like I was a piece of old furniture in their way, the feeling of being a guest in the house I'd spent my whole life building. But underneath the hurt, something new had started to grow, a quiet determination. By morning, I'd made my decision. I got up early, brewed a pot of coffee the way Linda used to, strong, almost bitter, and sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Emily and Mark to get up. I needed this conversation to happen on my terms. They finally emerged, both looking annoyed to find me waiting. We need to finish our talk from yesterday, I said, my voice steady. I've spoken with my attorney. I know my rights, and I know about the reversion clause in the deed. That means, if I'm not treated with the respect and care that were part of our agreement, I can legally take back this house. Mark rolled his eyes, but I saw the flicker of worry on Emily's face. You're bluffing, Mark said. You wouldn't do that to your own daughter. I looked him straight in the eye. Try me. Emily's expression turned desperate. Dad, come on. We were stressed, that's all. You just had surgery. Everyone's on edge. Let's just calm down and talk it out. I nodded. I'm willing to give you both one more chance, but it's the last. I want to see some real change, not just empty promises. If you can't show me even basic decency, then in 30 days I'll be serving you with legal notice to vacate. The air in the room turned thick. Mark tried to argue, but Emily stopped him with a look. Fine, she said. We'll try. Just don't do anything drastic. But their trying lasted about as long as it took for Mark to get hungry. That same afternoon, I heard him in the kitchen, complaining that there wasn't any of his favorite cereal left, blaming me for eating it. Emily snapped at me for leaving my shoes by the door, even though it was her muddy footprints on the tile. Little things maybe, but the resentment was baked into every word. That evening, I stepped out onto the front porch for some fresh air. The neighbor across the street, Mr. Howard, was watering his roses. He waved, then crossed over, concern on his face. Frank, you all right? You've looked tense lately. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. Let's just say family hasn't been easy. But I appreciate you checking in. Mr. Howard hesitated, then added quietly. My daughter moved back in last year. It's not always simple, is it? I shook my head. No, it isn't. But sometimes standing up for yourself is the hardest thing a father has to do. He patted my shoulder. If you ever need a witness, Frank, you know where to find me. That stuck with me. I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. People noticed, even if they didn't always speak up. Inside, Emily and Mark kept up appearances, at least for the first day or two. But beneath the surface, the same old patterns came creeping back. The snide remarks, the laziness, the assumption that I was there to clean up their messes and stay out of the way. I wrote down every word, every incident, every small slight. It wasn't just about building a legal case. It was about reminding myself that I wasn't imagining things. The disrespect was real, and I deserved better. By the end of that week, my patience had finally snapped. One night, after Mark had thrown his dirty dishes in the sink for me to wash and Emily had forgotten to pick up my prescription at the pharmacy, I sat them down in the living room. Enough, I said, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from long-simmering anger. This is your final notice. I gave you every chance, and you threw it away. 30 days from now, you'll be out of this house. And if you try to stop me, I'll let the law do what it does best. Emily looked like she might cry. Mark started to yell, but for the first time, I didn't back down. This isn't your home anymore, I finished. It's mine. And I'm taking it back. I stood up, leaving them stunned and silent on the couch. For the first time in years, I felt like the man I used to be, and I knew Linda, wherever she was, would have been proud. The next morning, the house felt different. It was as if my words the night before had changed the air itself. Emily and Mark were suddenly quiet, moving around me like I was a stranger in their midst. I'd always believed that family could heal with time and forgiveness, but after all this, I was beginning to understand, sometimes, the only way forward is through. Mark avoided me completely, spending most of the day in the basement, working, on his laptop, which I suspected was just an excuse to hide from reality. Emily, on the other hand, drifted around the house, sometimes tearful, sometimes angry, never quite ready to face what was coming. Once or twice, she tried to strike up a normal conversation, but the words didn't land. It was too late for small talk. I spent the day gathering documents and evidence, following James Carter's instructions to the letter. I found the deed, the gift transfer, and the clause that would bring this house back to me. I even printed out text messages, all those quick notes, from Emily and Mark where they treated me like an afterthought, their irritation laid bare for anyone who cared to read. I called Mr. Howard and a few other neighbors, asking if they'd noticed anything. Several agreed to write short statements. It was a strange feeling, collecting evidence against my own flesh and blood, but I knew it was the only way to protect myself. By Friday, James had prepared the official legal notice, a thick envelope, heavy with the authority of the state of Ohio. We met at his office, a small building tucked between a bakery and a florist, the kind of place where ordinary people go to solve their hardest problems. He explained everything in detail. Frank, you serve them with this. They have 30 days. If they don't leave, you file for eviction. You have every right, morally and legally. He slid the envelope across the desk. It felt colder than I expected. Are you ready for this? He asked. I looked him in the eye. I don't have any other choice, James. That evening, back at home, I waited until Emily and Mark were both in the living room, watching TV as if nothing was happening. I turned off the television, placed the envelope on the coffee table, and sat down across from them. What's this? Emily asked, her voice trembling. It's your 30-day notice, I said. You have until the end of next month to find somewhere else to live. After that, I will begin eviction proceedings. Mark jumped up, full of outrage. You can't be serious, Frank. Where are we supposed to go? That's your concern now, I replied. For years I gave you everything. I paid for your wedding, your car, helped when you lost your jobs. I handed you this house, trusting you'd treat me with the respect a father deserves. Instead, you made me feel like a burden. That ends now. Emily's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Dad, please, we can work this out. We'll do better, I promise. Don't do this. I shook my head. You said that before? But nothing changed. It's too late, Emily. Mark stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Emily stayed, clutching the envelope, her shoulders shaking. For a moment I almost caved, almost reached out to comfort her, like I had done her whole life. But I stayed firm. Sometimes love means holding people accountable, even when it hurts. That night, the house was silent. No TV, no arguing, just the distant sound of rain tapping on the roof. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Linda and the life we built together. I wondered what she would say if she saw me now, not as the gentle peacemaker, but as a man forced to defend his own dignity. I hoped she'd understand. Outside, the world kept turning. But inside, everything had changed. The countdown had begun. Over the next week, the mood in the house changed entirely. Tension clung to the walls like humidity before a summer storm. Emily barely spoke to me except in clipped, polite sentences. Mark kept his distance, spending most of his time on the phone in the backyard, no doubt complaining about me to whoever would listen. The old routine was gone. There were no more shared meals, no easy conversations, just the quiet, steady countdown of days left. Each morning, I'd find new evidence that I'd made the right choice. Dishes piled up in the sink, not mine. The trash went unemptied. If I didn't do the laundry, it simply wouldn't get done. Once, when I went into the living room, I caught a glimpse of Mark scrolling through rental listings on his phone, a scowl on his face. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. I spent most of my days putting my own affairs in order. I contacted the utility companies, let them know the names on the bills would soon change. I made appointments with my doctor, updated my will, and even cleaned out the old storage boxes in the attic, the ones with Linda's things, childhood drawings from Emily, and all the little artifacts that still made this place feel like home. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of Linda's letters, I heard a knock at my bedroom door. It was Emily. Her eyes were red and puffy, her voice small. "Dad, can we talk?" I nodded, setting aside the letters. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring down at her hands. "I know you think we don't care. I know you're angry, you have every right. But this is all I've ever known. You always took care of things. It never occurred to me that you wouldn't." I listened in silence, letting her words hang in the air. There was a crack in her armor I hadn't seen in years. She continued, her voice trembling. "Mark and we thought we were doing okay. We didn't realize how much we were hurting you. I'm sorry, Dad. I really am." For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to forgive and let everything go back to normal. But normal was what brought us here. "Emily," I said quietly, "I love you. I always will. But love doesn't mean letting someone walk all over you. I gave you every chance to show respect. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." She nodded, tears falling onto her hands. "What are we supposed to do?" "You find your own way, just like I did. That's how we learn." She left the room without another word, closing the door softly behind her. I sat in silence for a long time, holding one of Linda's letters to my chest, letting the sadness and relief wash over me at once. That night, as the sun set behind the backyard oak, I felt a strange sense of peace for the first time in years. I'd taken back my life. The price was high, but so was the reward, the return of my dignity, and the hope that maybe this painful lesson would someday bring us back together as a family. The countdown continued. 23 days left. The days moved by, each one a little quieter than the last. Emily and Mark spent most of their time behind closed doors, whispering about apartments and money. Sometimes I'd hear them argue in hushed tones after midnight, their voices drifting through the vents, brittle with anxiety. But I kept to my routines. I made my own meals, paid the bills, and walked the backyard every afternoon, tracing the old stone path Linda and I had laid together all those years ago. It was on one of those walks that my neighbor, Mrs. Evans, waved me over from her porch. She was a sharp-eyed widow who'd lived on our street for 40 years and missed nothing. "Frank," she called, "you're looking spry these days." I smiled, grateful for any sign of normalcy. "Just taking things one step at a time, Margaret. House feels different lately." She lowered her voice, concern lining her features. "I've noticed. Heard some shouting last week. Everything all right?" I hesitated only a second. "Not exactly. Emily and Mark, Well, let's just say the house is mine again soon. Sometimes people need to learn things the hard way. She nodded, understanding more than I said. If you need anything, or a witness, you know where I am. That small gesture meant more to me than I expected. Back inside, I gathered more evidence for James Carter. Every little thing helped. I had dates, times, notes about their treatment, statements from neighbors. I wanted to make sure nothing was left to chance. I even installed a small camera by the front door, just in case. If they tried anything to sabotage my efforts, I'd have proof. About 2 weeks before the deadline, Mark approached me in the kitchen. His whole attitude changed. He spoke with a forced calm, the kind people use when they're desperate. Frank, listen, I know we got off on the wrong foot. This is Emily's childhood home. Is there anything we can do to stay? Anything at all? I looked him dead in the eye. There was. But you both passed that point a long time ago. You didn't just treat me poorly, Mark. You treated this house like it was yours to take for granted. I'm sorry, but the decision stands. He clenched his jaw, anger flashing in his eyes, but he didn't argue. Maybe he knew it was useless. Maybe he was just too tired to fight anymore. Emily tried, too. She offered to cook my favorite dinner. She cleaned the house, left little notes of apology. For a moment, I almost let my guard down. But then I'd remember how they'd looked at me after my surgery, as if I was nothing but a burden, and the walls would go right back up. The last week approached, and boxes started to appear. Mark packed his things with barely a word. Emily cried a little each day, but she still went out for coffee, still called her friends, still seemed stunned that this was really happening. One evening, I found a letter slipped under my bedroom door. It was from Emily, full of regret and old memories, stories about Linda, apologies for things she didn't even remember doing. I read it twice, then tucked it away with Linda's old letters. Maybe one day, when the hurt had faded, it would mean something again. But for now, I kept my distance. I stayed strong. This was my house, my peace, my second chance at life. And I wouldn't give it up again. 7 days left. The final week inched forward, each day carrying the heaviness of an ending nobody really wanted but everybody needed. Boxes multiplied in the hallway. Mark barely looked at me anymore, moving through the house with his head down, collecting his things like a man at the end of a long shift. Emily tried to keep up appearances, making small talk in the kitchen, pretending nothing had changed, but the tremble in her voice gave her away. I spent those days finishing my preparations. I called James Carter, who assured me all the paperwork was in order, ready in case of any last-minute resistance. I cleaned out closets, donated old clothes, and spent long afternoons in the backyard, watering Linda's roses and thinking about the years that had slipped by. One evening, Emily found me outside just as the sun dipped behind the oak tree. She stood there awkwardly, arms wrapped around herself, looking smaller than I remembered. "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of you for this?" she asked, voice shaking. The question hit harder than I expected. I looked out over the garden, searching for the words. "I think your mother would want all of us to respect each other," I said quietly. "She believed in family, but she also believed in standing up for yourself. I let things go for too long. I did it for peace, but all it did was make us strangers in our own home." Emily looked away, biting her lip. "I wish I could take it back. I wish we hadn't. I wish you told me sooner how much it hurt." I nodded, my heart heavy. "I wish a lot of things. But wishing doesn't fix what's broken, Emily. Only actions do that." We stood there a long time in the fading light, the silence saying all the things we couldn't. Inside, Mark was already taping up the last boxes. I watched as he stacked them by the door, pausing now and then to glance around, as if trying to memorize every detail for when it was gone. On the second to last day, Emily cooked one last family dinner, nothing fancy, just her old recipe for pot roast, the way Linda taught her. We sat at the table in near silence, the clink of silverware louder than any words we might have said. It wasn't closure, but it was something. Afterward, Emily handed me a small envelope. "It's a letter for you for after we're gone," she said softly. "Maybe someday you'll be able to forgive us." I tucked the letter away, not ready to open it yet. Some wounds need time to breathe before they can heal. That night, I sat alone in my living room, truly alone, for the first time in years, and felt the mix of sadness and relief settle over me like an old, familiar blanket. Tomorrow, the house would be mine again. But I knew I'd never be the same man who gave it away in the first place. Moving day came, quiet and gray. Rain streaked the windows as Mark loaded the last boxes into the back of their borrowed minivan. Emily moved slowly from room to room, saying silent goodbyes to every corner, every photograph, every piece of her childhood. I watched from the hallway, feeling every ounce of the ache that comes with endings, but I didn't turn away. This was as necessary as it was painful. When all that was left were a few bags by the door and their old house keys, Emily finally approached me. She was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. "We're ready," she whispered. Mark lingered behind her, hands shoved deep in his pockets, a hollow look on his face. Emily held out the house keys, her fingers trembling. "I don't know if we'll ever deserve your forgiveness, Dad. I'm sorry, for everything. For how we treated you, for how blind we were." For a long moment, I just looked at the keys, the same set I'd handed her on a bright morning 5 years ago, never imagining this moment would come. I closed her hand gently over them and said, "This house was always meant to protect you, not to hurt us. Maybe one day, it can be that again." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Will you call me? Someday, when you're ready?" I managed a small smile. "Someday. But for now, you need to take care of yourself. You and Mark both." Mark stepped forward, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Thank you, Frank, for giving us a place when we needed it. I'm sorry it ended this way." I gave him a nod. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones you never wanted to teach. Emily picked up her bags and paused in the doorway for one last look. "Tell Mom I'm sorry," she said quietly, then stepped out into the rain. The door closed behind them with a gentle finality. I watched from the window as the van pulled away, my heart heavy but somehow lighter than it had been in years. The silence that filled the house was deep and clean, not the silence of anger or resentment, but of peace. For the first time in a long time, I walked through every room, touching the walls, opening the curtains, letting in the light. The house felt different now. Not empty, but open, waiting for whatever life had left to offer me. As I sat in my old leather chair that evening, the letter from Emily resting in my lap, I knew tomorrow would bring something new. I was home. And this time, I wouldn't let go of it so easily. That first evening alone, the house creaked with memories. The quiet was enormous but not unfriendly. I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled into my chair by the window, watching the rain ease off and sunlight peek through the clouds, the way it used to after a storm when Linda was still here. I held Emily's letter for a while before opening it. Her handwriting was shaky but sincere. She wrote about childhood memories, playing in the backyard, helping Linda bake cookies, late-night talks when she was afraid of thunderstorms. She wrote about regret, about wishing she'd realized sooner how much her actions had hurt me, about loving me even when she didn't show it. The words were heavy, and as I read them, I felt the pain begin to soften around the edges. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of each room, letting myself grieve for what was lost and feel gratitude for what I still had. Linda's photograph watched over the living room. Her roses flourished in the backyard, and her quiet wisdom echoed in my mind. Family is worth fighting for, but you can't force love or respect. Sometimes the only way to heal is to let go. Over the next few weeks, I filled my days with small, steady routines. I mended the fence, cooked my own meals, called old friends, and even joined a senior bowling league at the community center. For the first time in years, I slept well. I was no longer waiting for kindness, no longer walking on eggshells in my own home. Once, on a sunny Sunday, I found a bouquet of flowers and a card on the porch. The note wasn't signed, but I recognized Emily's handwriting. "Thank you for teaching me how to be better," it read. "I hope one day you'll let me try again." I didn't cry, but I let myself feel all of it, the sadness, the relief, and the faint hope that maybe, someday, we could rebuild something new from all these broken pieces. And as I sat on the porch that evening, breathing in the scent of Linda's roses, I realized that the greatest gift I could give my family, and myself, was to start living again, fully, bravely, and without regret. The house was mine once more, not just in deed, but in spirit. And I promised myself I would never again forget my own worth. Because in the end, love is proven by actions, and respect must always be mutual. The end.